She dropped the soup. The smell hit first, chicken broth and thyme, and something sharper underneath, and then the sound of ceramic against marble. A clean crack that rang through the entire first floor of the house like a small gunshot. The kitchen of the Vasquez estate had never echoed before. It echoed now. Marisol Reyes, 29 years old, stood in the middle of it, with both hands still curved in the shape of a bowl that no longer existed, staring at the spreading gold puddle on the floor and thinking two things simultaneously that she had never, not once in 4 years of nursing, dropped a patient's meal, and that she was not supposed to be here at all. She was here because her sister had called her at 11:30 the previous night, voice pitched low and strange, and said she needed a favor. She was here because the favor had turned out to be this: take my place, use my name, keep the job for 2 weeks, until I figure out what to do. She was here because she had said yes before she understood what she was saying yes to. The estate had a name. Apparently, Casa Vasquez. She had learned this from the iron letters above the gate when the car service dropped her at the bottom of the drive. The house itself was 3 stories of pale stone and dark glass set back from Lakeshore Drive, surrounded by grounds that looked precisely maintained in the way that suggested the maintenance was not optional. A man at the front door had checked her identification, the fake credentials her sister had prepared. The name, Lucia Reyes, printed in clean type, and said nothing beyond instructions about which hallway led where. She had been shown a room, given a schedule, told that her patient took his meals at set times, and that deviation from the schedule was not acceptable. She had been given a printed sheet of dietary requirements, physical therapy protocols, and a list of topics she was not to raise in conversation. The list was longer than the dietary requirements. None of that had prepared her for the soup. She crouched down and began gathering the larger pieces of ceramic with both hands, aware that her face was warm and that she was doing the thing she always did when flustered, which was to move faster than was actually helpful. She had a paper towel from the counter and was pressing it against the spill when she heard the sound of wheels on tile behind her. She had not heard him come in. She stood too fast, knocked her shoulder against the counter edge, and turned around. Dominic Vasquez sat in a manual wheelchair near the kitchen doorway, a white coffee mug balanced on the armrest, looking at her with the particular kind of patience that was not patience at all, but its exact opposite, held very still. He was younger than she had expected, 35, perhaps, with dark hair cut close, and a jaw that looked like it had been designed specifically to make conversation difficult. The paralysis was incomplete. She knew this from the medical file her sister had forwarded, affecting his lower limbs following a spinal cord injury 3 months ago. The result of what the official report described as a vehicle accident and what the unofficial version, pieced together from 2 minutes of internet searching, described as something else entirely. He was wearing a charcoal shirt, no tie, and he was watching her with eyes that gave away nothing except that they were paying close attention. She opened her mouth to apologize. He spoke first. Marisol, he said. Not Lucia. Not the name on her credentials. Not the name on the printed schedule sitting on the kitchen counter. Not the name his household staff had been given. He said it without inflection, the way someone says a word they have known for a long time. Then he lifted the coffee mug and drank from it, and did not say anything else. The kitchen was very quiet. Somewhere in the house a clock was ticking. She could hear her own pulse in her ears, which was not a sensation she associated with professional environments. She thought about the paper towel still in her hand, the soup still on the floor, and the particular quality of the silence he had left after saying her name, which was not an accident and was not an opening for her to fill. He knew. She did not know how he knew. Did not know when he had found out, or what it meant that he had said nothing to the man at the door, nothing to the staff, nothing until now, when he had let her drop a bowl of soup on his kitchen floor and then called her by the name she was not supposed to have. She set the paper towel down on the counter. She straightened her back. "I'll make another bowl," she said. He looked at her for a moment, that lasted approximately 7 years. Then he turned the wheelchair and moved back toward the hallway and said, over his shoulder, 40 minutes. My room. She did not ask whether that was a medical appointment or a conversation she was going to regret. She went to the refrigerator and found the leftover broth and started again from the beginning. She had remade the soup and delivered it without incident, small mercies, and was returning the tray to the kitchen when she passed the front sitting room and saw the man standing by the window. He had not been in the house when she arrived. He was taller than Dominic, broader through the shoulders, with the same dark coloring but a looser quality to the way he held himself, like someone who had never needed to make himself smaller in a room. He turned when she passed the doorway and smiled, the kind of smile that was deployed rather than felt. You must be the new caregiver, he said. Marco Vasquez. She would understand later, though no one introduced him to her that afternoon. He crossed to where she was standing and held out his hand, and she shook it because there was nothing else to do. Lucia. Right, she said yes. He nodded, still smiling, and his eyes moved over her face with an attention that had nothing to do with the question he had just asked. How is he today? He said, and the question was aimed at the floor between them, not at her, and she understood that it was not really a question about his brother's health. She told him Dominic had eaten lunch and was resting. Marco said that was good to hear. He held her hand 1 beat longer than a handshake required before releasing it, and she kept her expression neutral until she was back in the kitchen, and then she stood at the sink for 30 seconds with the tap running cold over her wrists. She was a nurse. She had cared for difficult patients, angry patients, patients who had tried to bite her, patients who had wept for hours without stopping. She was not easily rattled. She was rattled now, and she was trying to identify whether the source was the man in the wheelchair who had said her real name with the same tone one uses for weather, or the man by the window whose smile had felt like an inventory. She was washing the tray when she noticed it, a small lens mounted flush with the corner molding above the kitchen door, nearly invisible against the pale paint. She had almost missed it. She had almost missed it because she had not been looking for it, because she had not thought to look, because nothing in the careful briefing her sister had given her over the phone at midnight had included the words, "Your room has a camera," or "The house has a camera," or "Assume that everything you do is being watched." She set the tray down very carefully. She did not look at the lens again. She turned off the tap and dried her hands and thought, with great clarity, that she needed to understand exactly what her sister had put her in the middle of, and that she could not do that by leaving, and that she was therefore going to stay, and that she was going to be the most unremarkable caregiver that this house had ever employed until she knew enough to make a different decision. At 4 p.m, she went upstairs for the scheduled physical therapy session. She knocked twice on the door of Dominic's room. He said, "Come in." She went in. He was already positioned near the window, the chair angled so the light came from the left, and he was watching the lake with the expression of someone who had run out of things to think about and was waiting for more. She set her bag on the chair by the door and began going through the standard opening questions, pain level on a scale of 1 to 10. Any new sensation or numbness in the lower extremities, quality of sleep the previous night. He answered each one with the minimum number of words possible. She noted his answers on the chart. She moved to his left side and began the range of motion assessment. He tolerated it. He did not look at her. She was working through the hip rotation sequence, focused and precise. When he said, without turning, "Your sister is fine," she did not stop moving. She kept her hands exactly where they were and finished the count and said, "I know." He said nothing after that. Neither did she. And the session continued for its full 45 minutes. And at the end of it, she collected her bag and said she would be back at 7 for the evening check. And he said, "All right." And she closed the door behind her and stood in the hallway for a moment before she walked away. The clock in the sitting room was still ticking. The camera above the kitchen door was still watching, and somewhere in this house, she understood, every move she made was being measured against something she did not yet know the shape of. She went to her room and sat on the edge of the bed and thought about her sister, and about the name Dominic had said, and about the way Marco's eyes had moved over her face. Then she took out the small notebook she carried in every clinical placement and wrote down the date and the time and the address and the words he already knows. By the third morning, Marisol had learned the rhythms of the house the way she learned all clinical environments, not by being told, but by paying attention to what no one mentioned. She had learned that the kitchen staff arrived at 6 and left by 2, that the security rotation changed at the top of every even hour, that Dominic did not sleep past 5:30 in the morning because she could hear the low sound of the television through the wall at that hour, news with the volume barely above silence. She had learned that he drank his coffee black and that he read physical mail rather than email, and that he had not, in the 3 days she had been in the house, received a single personal visitor who came through the front door the way Marco had. Other men came and went through the side entrance off the garage. She had not been introduced to any of them. She had not asked. The morning therapy session was at 8. She arrived 2 minutes early, which was her habit, and found him already transferred from the bed to the chair, which meant he had either done it himself or had the night aide help him before she arrived. The medical file noted that he had begun refusing assistance with transfers 4 weeks into his stay at the rehabilitation facility, 2 weeks before he discharged himself against the attending physician's recommendation. She had read that note 3 times. It told her something about him that the rest of the file did not. He was not a man who stayed anywhere he had not chosen to be. She started with the passive range of motion work, moving through the hip flexors and the knee extensors with the same methodical attention she brought to every session, noting the tension in the muscle groups and the point at which his breathing changed, which indicated the threshold of discomfort he was willing to tolerate before he shifted his weight. He had a high tolerance. She was adjusting the angle of his left knee, focused on the resistance. When she felt something that made her pause, she moved the joint again, carefully. He was bearing fractional weight through the quadriceps. Not much. Not enough that an inattentive therapist would notice, but it was there. A low, sustained engagement that had not been present in the notes from the rehabilitation facility 3 weeks ago. She said nothing. She finished the sequence and moved to the right side and did the same assessment, the same engagement, slightly stronger. She wrote her notes with her face arranged into the expression she used when she was thinking about something other than what she appeared to be thinking about. He watched her write. She capped the pen and said his pain level was unchanged from yesterday, which was true, and that she wanted to add a seated weight-bearing exercise to the next session, which was also true, but not for the reason she gave. He said, "Fine." She picked up her bag. "You work fast," he said. She turned around. He was looking at the notepad she had just put away, not at her. Most therapists take longer to notice. She kept her expression neutral. Notice what? It was not quite a question. He looked up then, and the quality of his attention was the same as it had been in the kitchen on the first day, thorough, unhurried, interested in the gap between what she said and what she meant. "That I'm not where the file says I am," he said. The room was quiet. Outside the window, the lake was gray and flat under an overcast sky. She said, "Why are you hiding it?" He said, "I'm not hiding it from you." She understood the distinction. She picked up her bag again and told him she would see him at 4. She was thinking about that exchange when she went downstairs and found Marco in the hallway outside the dining room, holding a cup of coffee he did not appear to be drinking. He smiled when he saw her. It was the same smile as the first day, the one she had already categorized as a tool rather than a reflex. Lucia. She had to remember, every time, to respond to that name without the half-second delay that betrayed her. She was getting better at it. "Good morning." He fell into step beside her, which she had not invited, moving toward the kitchen at her pace. "How is the progress?" he said. She told him the same thing she had told him the day before, that Dominic was responding well to the therapy protocol and that she expected continued gradual improvement. Marco nodded. He set his coffee cup on the counter and turned to face her and said, "And the previous caregiver, Lucia, she was your sister, wasn't she?" The sentence was arranged like a question but delivered like a statement that was waiting for her to confirm something he already believed. She held his gaze. She said, "I'm sorry." He smiled again. Easier this time. Leaning back against the counter with both hands wrapped around the cup, "I only ask because the agency mentioned there was a last-minute substitution. I wanted to make sure the transition was smooth." His eyes were on her face with that same inventory quality she had noticed the first day, moving over her features with a patience that did not match the casual register of what he was saying. She told him the transition had been smooth and that her sister had briefed her thoroughly on the case. He said that was good to hear. He said Dominic could be difficult and that it was important to him, to the whole family, that his brother's recovery was supported by people they could trust. He said the word trust the way someone says a word that has a second meaning they are not going to explain. She left the kitchen as soon as she could do so without appearing to leave the kitchen. She went to her room and sat on the bed and thought about the phrase, "previous caregiver, Lucia. Your sister, wasn't she?" Marco had arranged those words in that order deliberately. He knew her sister's name. He knew there had been a substitution. He was telling her that he knew, the same way Dominic had told her he knew on the first day, except that Dominic had said her real name and then left the space empty and let her decide what to do with it. And Marco had said these things while smiling at her with eyes that were measuring the distance between what she admitted and what she was hiding. Two different men. She was beginning to understand. Two different reasons to know the same information. She spent the afternoon doing laundry and reorganizing the medication cart in the upstairs hallway. Tasks that were useful and that kept her moving through the house in ways that looked purposeful. At 3:45, she passed the door of Dominic's study, which was the room adjacent to his bedroom that he used for work. He apparently had not stopped doing simply because he could not walk. The door was not fully closed. She had not looked in before. She did not look in now. But she slowed. She could hear his voice, low and level, speaking in the particular way people speak when they are being precise about something that matters. She heard him say a name she did not recognize. She heard him say the word confirmed. Then there was a pause and she heard the sound of a chair, and she kept walking. At 4, she knocked on his door for the second session. He said, "Come in." She came in. He was at the window again. But this time he was not watching the lake. He was watching her come across the room, and he was doing it without any particular effort to conceal that he was doing it. She set her bag down and said, "Seated weight-bearing today, like I mentioned this morning." He said, "All right." She brought the therapy blocks from her bag and positioned them, and she helped him shift forward in the chair until his feet were flat on the floor and she could assess the load distribution through the soles. She talked him through the breath pattern. In through the nose. Slow release. The weight moving down through the heels rather than gripping through the toes. He did it correctly the first time. He did everything correctly the first time. She was noticing, not because it was easy, but because he had already been doing it in private and was simply allowing her to see it now. "You said you weren't hiding it from me," she said, watching the alignment of his knees. "But you have been." He's breathed out slowly. "I've been confirming what I thought I already knew," he said. She looked up, which is, he held the position, steady, not shifting his weight back into the chair. "That you're better than the file," he said. She did not know what to say to that. He released the hold and settled back, and she recorded the weight-bearing duration and said it was good progress. He said he knew. She was closing her bag when he said, without any change in his voice, "Don't answer the door if Marco comes by tonight." She stopped. She looked at him. His face was not giving her anything beyond the words. She said, "All right." He nodded once, like something had been settled, and she left. That night she sat at the small desk in her room, with her notebook open, and wrote down everything she remembered about both conversations. Marco's and Dominic's, the exact words in the order they had been said, the pauses, the things that had not been said. She had learned early in her career that the clinical picture was never only what the chart told you. The chart told you what had been recorded. The patient told you what was actually happening. If you knew how to listen, she was listening now to a house full of things that were not being said, and she was building a picture from the silence. Her phone buzzed at 10:40. "Ha, sister." She let it ring twice before answering, and she walked to the window and spoke quietly and said she was fine and the job was fine and she needed to ask a question. Her sister said, "Of course." She said, "Tell me about the man who hired you." There was a pause on the other end of the line, a long one. Then her sister said she thought Marisol already knew, and Marisol said she knew the name and the medical facts, and she needed to know the rest. And her sister said she would explain everything when she could do it in person, that it wasn't something to say on the phone, that she was sorry, that she had not understood how complicated it would become. Marisol said she understood. She said goodnight and ended the call and stood at the window and looked at the lights on the lake and thought about the word complicated and all the shapes it could take. She opened her notebook and wrote one more line beneath everything else she had written: "He is hiding his recovery from his brother." And underneath that, smaller, "Why?" The power went out at 8:17 in the evening, 14 days after Marisol had arrived. She was in the upstairs hallway when it happened, returning the evening medication tray to the cart, and the darkness came all at once without any flicker or warning, the way darkness comes when it is not accidental. The security panel at the end of the hall went dark with it. She stood still and counted to 5, the way she had been trained to do in hospital blackouts, waiting for the backup generator to engage. Nothing engaged. She heard footsteps on the stairs below, fast and deliberate, and then voices near the front of the house speaking in low, urgent registers she could not make out. She heard a door close. Then the house was quiet in the particular way that large houses are quiet when everyone in them is listening. She moved by memory down the hall to Dominic's room, keeping one hand on the wall. She knocked twice and opened the door without waiting, because in a clinical context, darkness and silence together were not a combination she waited through. He was exactly where she expected him to be, in the chair by the window, which gave enough ambient light from the city below and the lake beyond that she could see the outline of him and he could see her. He had a phone in his hand, screen down. He had turned it face down. She understood. When he heard her in the hall, "I'm staying in here until the power comes back," she said. It was the clinical protocol for patient safety during a facility outage. It was also the only room in the house where she felt certain of the geometry. He said, "Close the door." She closed the door and pulled the chair from the small desk near the window and sat down, and they were quiet together for a while. The city moved below them, indifferent to the dark. She could see the pale shape of his hands on the armrests and the faint reflected light across the line of his jaw. She had spent 2 weeks in close physical proximity to this man, moving his limbs and reading his vital signs and writing his progress in a notebook she kept locked in her bag, and she had not, until this moment, been in a room with him that did not have a clinical purpose to fill the space between them. The darkness removed the purpose. What remained was 2 people in a room with a question neither of them had asked yet. He said, "You're not afraid of the dark?" She said, "No." He said, "Most people become different in the dark." She said, "Most people become what they already were. The dark just makes it harder to perform the other version." He was quiet for a moment. Outside, a distant siren moved through the city and faded. "That's an unusual thing for a caregiver to say," he said. She said, "I'm an unusual caregiver." She heard something that might have been the beginning of a sound he decided not to make. She watched the city lights move across the window and said, 3 months ago you were in a car when someone tried to kill you. The official report says it was an accident." She paused. "You discharged yourself from rehabilitation 2 weeks ahead of the recommended timeline and came back to this house." She paused again. "You are recovering faster than anyone in this house except me knows, and you are doing it quietly and on purpose." She stopped. The room held the words. He did not deny any of them. Why are you telling me you already know all of that? He said. She said, because you asked me why I wasn't afraid of the dark, and I'm answering the real question. The silence after that was different from the silence before it. She could feel him deciding something. Then he said, the car wasn't an accident. She said nothing. She waited. There were 3 people who knew my route that night. He said, my driver, who has been with my family for 11 years, my assistant, who I have known since we were children, and my brother. He said it without weight, the way someone states a coordinate rather than a wound. She understood that the absence of weight was the weight, she said, and the driver and the assistant, he said, are still alive and employed. The sentence closed like a door. She sat with that for a moment. She thought about Marco's smile, Marco's hand holding hers 1 beat too long, Marco's eyes moving over her face in the kitchen while he said the word trust. She thought about the camera above the kitchen door that she had not looked at directly since the day she found it. She thought about Dominic turning his phone face down when he heard her in the hall, and about the conversation she had heard through the study door, and about the phrase, I'm not hiding it from you, which she had understood at the time to mean from you specifically, but which she now understood meant from you, because you are the only person in this house I am not also watching. Can I ask you something? She said. He said yes. The camera above the kitchen door. He said nothing. And the one in the corner of the sitting room on the 2nd floor. She continued. Are there others? He said. Not in your room. She took a breath. That's not quite what I asked. He turned his head toward her then. The first time he had looked directly at her since she had come into the room, and in the low ambient light she could see that his expression was not what she expected. It was not cold. It was not calculating. It was something closer to the expression of a person who has been caught doing something they cannot fully defend. 4, he said. Kitchen, sitting room, front hall, garage entrance, she said. And you watch them, he said. I watched them. Past tense. She noted it. She did not comment on it. The power came back at 10:12. Sudden and total. Every light in the room flaring to full brightness at once. They both went still for a second in the abrupt exposure of it, blinking. She looked at him and he looked at her, and in the light he looked older than he did in the dark. Or perhaps more precisely, in the dark he had looked like a person, and in the light he looked again like the version of himself that the house required him to be. She stood and moved the desk chair back to its place and picked up the small flashlight she had set on the windowsill when she came in. She was moving toward the door when her phone rang. Her sister's name on the screen. She answered because she always answered, and because 2 weeks of not answering questions had built a pressure she could feel in her chest. Mari. Her sister's voice was tight in the way it got when she was being careful. I just need to know you're safe. She said she was safe. She said the power had gone out and was back on. She heard her sister exhale. Then her sister said, I heard Marco was there today. Marisol said yes. Marco had been in the house that morning. Her sister said, he's going to figure it out if he hasn't already. He's the one who arranged the original placement. Mari. He was the one who hired me. Marisol stood very still. She said, he hired you, her sister said, through an intermediary. But yes, I didn't know who it was until later. I didn't know any of it until I started putting the pieces together. And by then, she stopped. She said, by then I understood why I needed to leave. Marisol said, very quietly, Lucia, why did you need to leave? Her sister said, because of the contract, because of what Marco told me when I first arrived. He told me I was there to take care of Dominic, but what he actually said, the way he said it, she paused. He said I was going to be there when the family needed me to be there, and I realized what that meant when I found out what Dominic and I were supposed to be to each other. The room was very bright, after 2 hours of darkness. Marisol was aware of Dominic behind her, of the fact that she was having this conversation with her back to him, of the fact that he was almost certainly hearing every word. She said, What were you supposed to be to each other? Her sister said, there was an arrangement between our families. Our father made an agreement a long time ago, and Marco was the one enforcing it. I was supposed to marry Dominic. That was why I was placed there. That was the whole point. Marisol said nothing. She was doing the arithmetic of everything she had seen and heard in 2 weeks, and it was arranging itself into a shape she did not like. And when you found out, she said. Her sister said, I ran. And I called you, and I am so sorry. Mar, I didn't know Marco would still be watching the house. I didn't know he would recognize the name. A pause. Does Dominic know you're not me? Marisol said yes. Her sister said, since when? She said, since the first day. Her sister was quiet for a long time. Then she said, be careful, please. Marisol ended the call. She stood facing the door. Behind her, the wheelchair moved slightly, the small sound of the wheel lock releasing. She turned around. Dominic was looking at her with an expression she had not seen on him before, something that was not cold and was not calculating and was not the careful blankness he deployed in clinical sessions. It was something she did not have a clean word for. She looked at him and said, the arrangement. He said, yes. She said, you knew about it. He said, I knew about it. She said, and you knew who I was when I arrived. Which means you knew I was her sister. Which means you knew why she ran. He said, yes. Each answer came back to her like a stone set down. No defense offered. No explanation attached. She looked at him for a long moment in the bright, recovered light of the room. She said, what did you want from me? He held her gaze and said, at first, information about where she went. She said, and now? He was quiet. Outside, the lake was dark and the city was lit, and the clock in the sitting room downstairs had resumed its ticking. He said, I don't know. It was the most honest thing he had said to her in 2 weeks, and she understood it because it was the most honest thing she had heard in a long time. And honest things from people who had spent their lives performing certainty had a particular weight. She did not forgive it. She was not ready to forgive it, but she heard it, and she turned and opened the door and walked down the hall to her room. And she sat on the edge of the bed in the full light and opened her notebook and wrote, she was sent here. I was sent here, and Dominic is the only one in this house who had a reason to stop it, and hasn't. She underlined the last word twice. Then she closed the notebook and did not sleep for a long time. She did not go to him the next morning with a bag or a plan. She went with the medication tray and her notebook and the 8 o'clock schedule, because she had decided during the long hours of not sleeping that she was not going to collapse the professional structure before she had finished saying what she needed to say inside it. She knocked. He said, come in. She came in and set the tray on the table and looked at him directly for the first time since the night before, when the lights had come back and everything in the room had been made visible at once. He looked like he had not slept either. She noted this without satisfaction. She administered the morning medications and checked the blood pressure and wrote the numbers in the chart and capped the pen and said, I want to talk about the cameras. He said, all right. She said, I want to talk about why you let me stay after you already knew who I was. He said, all right again, in the same register. And she understood he had been expecting this since last night and had spent the dark hours preparing for it the same way she had. She pulled the desk chair to the middle of the room and sat down and set her notebook on her knee and looked at him. Tell me what you knew on the first day, she said. He was quiet for a moment, his hands still on the armrests. And then he said, I knew your name. I knew you were Lucia Reyes's older sister, and that you had a nursing license and no criminal record, and that you had agreed to come in her place at approximately 11:40 the previous night. She said, how? He said, the same way I know most things. Someone in my household told me. She said, Marco. He said, no, Marco did not know until later. She did not ask who, because the structure of the answer told her it was someone in the house who reported to Dominic and not to his brother. and the existence of that person was its own piece of information she needed to hold carefully. She said, "And the cameras. Were you watching me?" He said, "For the first 4 days," she said. "And then," he said, "and then I stopped." She said, "Why?" He said, "Because I had already confirmed what I needed to confirm." She said, "Which was," he said, "that you weren't sent by anyone who wanted to hurt me." The room was very quiet. She thought about that sentence, the shape of a life in which that was a threshold one had to clear before a person could simply be present in your house. She said, "And the original plan, to use me to find Lucia." He did not flinch at the word use. He said, "Yes." She said, "That was why you let me stay." He said, "That was why I let you through the door." The distinction was precise, and she heard it. She said, "What changed?" He was quiet for longer this time, looking at the window rather than at her, and when he looked back, his expression was the one from last night, the one she did not have a clean word for. He said, "You did." She let that sit. She did not respond to it the way part of her wanted to, which was to lean into it. Because the part of her that wanted to lean into it was also the part of her that trusted people before she had finished understanding them, which was the flaw her mother had named when she was 19 and which she had been managing with varying success ever since. She said, "I need to know what you were going to do. If I had told you where she was," he said, "I was going to bring her back." She said, "To the arrangement." He said, "No." She said, "Then to what?" He said, "To end it properly, not to enforce it. My brother enforces it. I inherited it." She heard the difference in those words. The way inherited carried a weight that enforces did not. She said, "Your brother arranged the placement." He said, "Yes." She said, "Your brother is the one who wanted her in this house." He said, "My brother is the one who negotiated the original agreement with her father 20 years ago, when we were all children and no one thought to ask what the children wanted." Something moved through his voice on that last sentence. Something she recognized as the particular kind of anger that has been held so long it no longer raises its volume. She was going to say something. She did not get to say it. The door opened. Not a knock. Not a pause. The door opened the way doors open when the person on the other side has decided they are not required to ask. Marco Vasquez came into the room with the particular ease of someone who had spent years entering rooms that technically belonged to someone else. He looked at Marisol in the chair. He looked at Dominic by the window. He smiled, the inventory smile, and said, "I hope I'm not interrupting." Dominic said, "You are." Marco's smile did not change. He moved further into the room, and his hands went into the pockets of his jacket, and Marisol watched the two men in the room occupy it differently. Dominic still, contained, watching. Marco, moving, filling space, performing a casualness that was as precisely constructed as everything else about him. "I wanted to check on the progress," Marco said. He looked at Marisol when he said it, not at his brother. "Lucia has been here nearly 3 weeks. I imagine by now she has a good sense of where things stand." The way he said Lucia told her he had known for longer than this morning. He had known, she thought, and had been deciding what to do with it. She kept her face and her voice exactly level. She said, "Your brother is progressing well." Marco nodded slowly. He said, "I'm glad to hear it." He took one hand out of his pocket and set something on the edge of the dresser near the door, a small object she could not immediately identify from where she sat. "I've been thinking," he said, still looking at her, "that it might be time to discuss the next phase of care, given how long Lucia has been here." He said the name again, precisely, and looked at Dominic when he said it this time. "It occurs to me that having Lucia so close to Dominic during his recovery creates a natural opportunity for everyone to move forward." The sentence was constructed with the care of something that had been rehearsed. Marisol understood its architecture. Marco was not talking about medical care. He was talking about the arrangement, and he was talking about it in front of Dominic as a way of putting it on the table between all three of them where it could not be quietly moved aside. Dominic said, "Leave." One word. Flat. Marco said, "I'm only trying to." Dominic said, "I know what you're trying to do." His voice did not rise. It did not need to. There was a quality to it that Marisol had not heard in 2 weeks of daily sessions, something that had not been present in the clinical room, something that she recognized as the register a person uses when they are done being careful. Marco's hands came out of both pockets. Something shifted in the way he was holding himself. The casual ease replaced by something more deliberate. He looked at his brother and said, "She's a Reyes. You understand what that means. The agreement stands whether you like it or not," Dominic said. "The agreement is a piece of paper our fathers signed before either of us was old enough to understand what our fathers were," Marco said. "It's a binding commitment to this family's," Dominic said. "Don't." One more word. Marco stopped. The room was very still. Marisol looked at the object Marco had set on the dresser. It was a phone. Not his phone, because his phone was visible in his breast pocket. A second phone. Small and cheap. The kind that was purchased to be used once and discarded. She understood, in the way she had learned to understand things in this house, by looking at what was placed and where. That the phone was not incidental. It was a message. It was leverage of a kind she was not yet able to fully read. She stood up from the chair. Both men looked at her. She said to Marco, "What is that?" He said, "A precaution," she said. "Against what?" He said, "Against the possibility that Lucia decides to disappear again before the family has had a chance to discuss her situation properly." He smiled. "Since you seem to be in contact with her, since you came here in her place, it would be a shame if her location became something other people needed to know about." The air in the room changed. She felt it the way she felt barometric pressure before a storm, a shift that was not yet sound or movement, but was already committed to becoming both. She looked at the phone on the dresser and understood Marco had been watching her, not through Dominic's cameras, which Dominic had turned off, through something of his own. He knew she had spoken to her sister. He may have known where the call originated. He was telling her, in the language of objects placed carefully in rooms, that he could use that information, that her sister's safety was now part of this conversation whether anyone said so directly or not. She looked at Dominic. He was already looking at her. His face was doing something she had only seen once before, in the dark 2 nights ago, the expression she did not have a word for, except that she had a word for it now. It was the expression of a person choosing, not calculating an outcome. Choosing. He turned to his brother and said, "Get out of my house." Marco said, Dominic said, "This is my house. This is my recovery. And she is not part of any agreement because I am telling you right now, in front of a witness, that I am dissolving it." Marco said, "You can't dissolve an agreement between families without," Dominic said, "Get the ledger." The room went absolutely still. Marco's face changed for the first time since he had walked in. Something left it. The performing ease. The inventory patience. And what was underneath was rawer and smaller than what had been on top. He said, very quietly, "You don't want to do that." Dominic said, "I've wanted to do it for 3 years. Pick up your phone and leave." Marco looked at his brother for a long moment. Then he looked at Marisol with an expression that was no longer a smile. He picked up the phone from the dresser. He left the room without another word, and Marisol listened to his footsteps go down the hall and down the stairs and across the front entry and out the door. And then the house was quiet again, in a different way than it had been quiet before, a way that felt like something structural had shifted. She sat back down in the chair. She set her notebook on her knee and looked at Dominic, who had not moved, who was looking at the window with the post-adrenaline stillness of someone who had just done something they had been building toward for a long time and was now in the immediate aftermath of it. She said, "The ledger," he said. "Financial records. Transactions my brother made in my name while I was in rehabilitation, some of which are not legal, most of which he does not know I have copies of. She said, "You've had them the whole time." He said, "I've had them for 3 years." She remembered what he had said in the dark. "I've wanted to do it for 3 years." She said, "Why didn't you use them before?" He looked at her. He said, "Because I was still trying to find another way. Because he is my brother." He said that last sentence the way someone says a sentence they have finished arguing with. Past tense. Settled. She nodded slowly. She understood that too. The long internal negotiation between what someone has done to you and what you are still willing to call them. She sat with him in the quiet room for a while without speaking. The lake outside was bright under a midday sky. Somewhere in the house, a door closed softly, which was one of the security staff. She knew. The ordinary sounds of the house continuing. She said, "Eventually, you didn't have to do that." He said, "I know." She said, "You had a plan. I was part of it. You could have let him take it where he wanted to take it and gotten what you needed." He said, "Yes." She said, "Why didn't you?" He looked at the window for a long time. Then he said, "Because the plan was wrong. I knew it was wrong when I made it, and I kept it anyway because I was used to making plans that required people to be pieces rather than people." He paused. "You are not a piece." The sentence was simple and plainly meant, and she felt it land somewhere it had no clinical right to land. She picked up her notebook. She capped her pen. She stood and picked up the medication tray and moved toward the door, and then stopped with her hand on the frame and said, without turning around, "My sister is in Milwaukee. She's staying with a friend from nursing school. She's safe." She heard him take a breath. She said, "You should know, since you wanted to find her, that she is fine, and she does not want to come back. And I think if you gave it any real consideration, you would agree that she shouldn't have to." A pause. "I think you already agree. I think you agreed before I got here." She waited. He said, "Yes." She said, "All right." She went out into the hallway and pulled the door closed behind her and stood in the corridor for a moment with the tray in her hands and the quiet of the house. Around her and the feeling, unfamiliar and not entirely unwelcome, that something had just moved from the category of complicated into the category of possible. The week after Marco left the house was the quietest week Marisol had spent there. Not silent. Quiet was different from silent. Silent was the absence of sound. Quiet was the presence of something that did not need to fill itself with noise. The security staff came and went. The kitchen staff arrived at 6 and left by 2. The physical therapy sessions continued at 8 and 4. The medication chart was updated twice daily. These were the same rhythms as the 3 weeks before, but the quality of them had changed. The way the quality of a room changes after a window has been opened and the air has moved through, and then the window is closed again, and the air that remains is not the same air that was there before. She had called her sister the morning after Marco left and said it was over, or at least the part of it that threatened her was over. And her sister had been quiet for a long time and then said she was sorry for all of it. The whole chain of it. Starting from the night she called Marisol at 11:30 and said she needed a favor, Marisol said she knew. She said she was not angry. She said she might be a little angry, but not in a way that required resolution over the phone. Her sister laughed, which was the first time Marisol had heard her laugh in a month, and the sound of it loosened something in her chest that she had not known was pulled tight. Dominic's attorney arrived on a Tuesday. A small, precise woman named Gretchen, who carried a document case the size of a small suitcase and spoke in the clipped, efficient manner of someone who billed by the quarter hour. Marisol was not present for that meeting. She did not need to be, and did not ask to be. She was in the upstairs hallway when Gretchen left, and their eyes met briefly, and Gretchen nodded once. The nod of one professional, acknowledging another, and Marisol understood from it that the ledger had served its purpose. She learned the details later, not from Dominic directly, but from the way the house changed in the days that followed, 2 of the men who had come through the garage side entrance stopped coming. A third arrived once and left within 20 minutes. The phone in Dominic's study rang twice in a single afternoon, which was twice more than it usually rang. Marco did not return. She did not ask about him. Dominic did not offer. She understood that there were parts of this that were not hers to know, and that she did not need to know them to understand what had happened. A man had been using his brother's incapacity as a period of uncontested authority, and the period had ended, and the reckoning of that ending was being conducted in registers she was not fluent in and did not need to be. What she was fluent in was the body. She was fluent in what the body did and what it was capable of when it was given the right conditions and the right time. By the end of the 3rd week, she had Dominic doing standing transfers with minimal assistance, his hands on the parallel bars she had requested through the household account, his weight shifting onto his feet with increasing confidence and decreasing dependence on the bars themselves. He did not perform for her. That was what she had come to value most about working with him. He did not perform. He let her see exactly where he was, which meant she knew exactly what to ask of him, and he trusted that she would not ask more than that. It was, she reflected, the cleanest working relationship she had ever had with a patient, and also the most complicated. And she was aware that those 2 things were not contradictory. On a Friday morning, 7 days after Marco had left, and 22 days after she had arrived with a false name and a borrowed set of credentials and a bowl of soup she had dropped on pale marble, she packed her bag. She did it methodically, the way she always packed, folding rather than stuffing. Her clinical materials separate from her personal items, the notebook at the top where she could reach it. She had told herself she would leave on a Friday, because Fridays were transition days in clinical placements. The day handoffs happened, the day the next professional arrived. There was no next professional scheduled. She had not arranged one. She was aware of this gap in her planning and was choosing not to examine it too closely. She carried her bag to the top of the stairs. She stood there for a moment looking down at the front hall, at the pale stone floor and the iron and glass front door and the light coming through it from outside. 3 weeks ago she had come through that door with her heart going too fast and her hands already doing the thing they did when she was managing anxiety, which was to find small tasks and complete them. She had found a great many small tasks in this house. She had completed all of them. She picked up her bag and started down the stairs. She was at the bottom when she heard it. Not the wheelchair. That was what stopped her, the absence of the wheelchair's sound, which she had learned in 3 weeks, to hear the way you learn, to hear any sound that is present in every hour of your day. And its absence was therefore as loud as a word spoken clearly in a quiet room. She turned around. Dominic Vasquez was standing at the top of the stairs. Not straight, not easy, not without the visible effort of it. His left hand on the newel post, and his weight distributed carefully, and his jaw set in the particular way it was set when he was doing something that cost him. But standing, on his feet, at the top of the stairs, looking down at her. He had not told her he could do this. She had not asked. She had known for 2 weeks that the capacity was there, building in the muscle groups she assessed each morning. And she had let him come to it in his own time, because that was the only way any of it worked. He had come to it now. He was looking at her with the expression she had finally named, the one from the dark, and from the morning after, and from every clinical session in the last week, where she had caught it at the edges of his face when he thought she was focused elsewhere. It was the expression of a person who was not certain and had decided to act anyway. She had seen it in patients before. She had never seen it look like this. He came down the stairs, slowly, one hand still on the rail, the other finding the wall. 3 steps and then 4, and then the last 4 in a row without stopping. She did not move toward him. She did not reach out her hands in the professional gesture she would have used in a session. She stood at the bottom and watched him come to her, and understood that he did not need her hands right now. That what he needed was for her to be standing at the bottom of the stairs when he arrived, which she was. He stopped one step above her, which put them at the same height, and he looked at her and she looked at him, and neither of them said anything for a moment. Then he said, "Stay." One word. He did not dress it up. He did not attach conditions or explanations or the careful architecture of a man who was accustomed to framing requests, so they landed as something other than requests. He said it the way she had come to understand he said things when he meant them entirely plainly, with nothing around it to soften or obscure. She looked at him. She said, "That's not a plan." He said, "No." She said, "You can't hire me. I came here under a false name, and I've been practicing under my sister's credentials for 3 weeks, which is a licensing violation in the state of Illinois." Something shifted at the corner of his mouth. It was not quite a smile, but it was in the vicinity of one. He said, "I'm aware." She said, "And you still want me to stay?" He said, "I want you to stay. The logistics of how that works are a separate problem." She said, "You're very calm about a fairly significant licensing issue." He said, "I've had more significant problems this month." She said, "That is genuinely true." She looked at her bag in her hand, and then at him on the step above her. She thought about the notebook in the top of the bag, all the notes she had taken, the things she had written the first night he already knows. She thought about what she had written the night after the power came back. She was sent here. I was sent here. And Dominic is the only one in this house who had a reason to stop it, and hasn't. She had underlined the last word twice and then kept going, kept choosing to be present in the house one more day, and then one more day. Not because she was trapped, and not because she was waiting to be rescued, but because she was paying attention to something she had not yet finished understanding. She had finished understanding it now. The understanding sat in her chest quietly, the way things sat when they were true rather than convenient. She set her bag down on the bottom step. He looked at it. She said, "I'm going to need my actual credentials on file. My actual name in the system." He said, "Done by Monday." She said, "And I want a proper contract. Scope of practice. 2 hours. Compensation. Termination clause." He said, "Gretchen can have it drafted by end of week." She said, "And my sister is never part of any arrangement, formal or informal, involving your family or any affiliated parties, now or in the future." He said, "Already dissolved. In writing, witnessed." She said, "I know. I want to say it out loud anyway." He said, "All right." She said, "All right." She picked the bag back up and looked at him and said, "You should sit down. You've been on your feet for 4 minutes and your left quad is starting to compensate." He said, "I'm fine." She said, "You're doing well and your left quad is compensating. Both things are true." He held her gaze for a moment, and then, with the particular grace of someone who has learned to accept accurate information without argument, he reached for the newel post and lowered himself to sit on the bottom step. She sat beside him, not across from him, not in the desk chair with her notebook open, not in the clinical configuration of therapist and patient, beside him, on the bottom step of the staircase in his house, with their shoulders 6 inches apart and the light coming through the front door and the clock in the sitting room ticking the way it always ticked. Indifferent to what the people in the house were doing, he said, "I should have told you the truth on the first day." She said, "Yes." He said, "I didn't know how to do that. I'm not sure I remembered how." She said, "You figured it out." He said, "You made it harder to do otherwise." She said, "I've been told I'm difficult." He said, "You've been told wrong. You're clarifying. It's different." She thought about that. She thought it was one of the more precise things anyone had said to her in a long time, and she had known precise people. She did not say this. She looked at the light on the floor instead and let it be enough. Her sister called at noon. Marisol answered and said she was staying for a while and that she would explain everything properly when she saw her in person. Her sister was quiet for one beat, and then said, "Are you okay?" Marisol said yes. Her sister said, "Are you actually okay, or are you doing the thing where you say you're okay?" Marisol said, "I'm actually okay. I think I might be more than okay. I need more data before I commit to that, but the preliminary indicators are good." Her sister laughed again, the same laugh as before, and said she would want a full briefing. Marisol said she would provide one. She ended the call and went back to where Dominic was still sitting on the bottom step, because she had asked him to rest his left quad, and he had, which continued to be one of the more remarkable things about him, and she sat back down beside him and opened her notebook to a new page. She wrote the date at the top. She wrote the time. She wrote the address, which she had written on the first day too, except that the first day she had written it as a record, and today she wrote it as something else, something closer to a beginning. She looked at what she had written. She looked at the light on the pale stone floor and the front door and the lake beyond it, visible through the glass, wide and grey and entirely indifferent to the two people sitting on the bottom step of a staircase deciding, one careful word at a time. What happened next? She capped the pen. She closed the notebook. She set it on her knee and sat in the quiet of the house that had stopped performing at her and let herself be, for the first time in 22 days, simply present. Outside, the city moved. Inside, the clock ticked, and neither of them needed to say anything else right now, because some things are not resolved by words and do not need to be, and the step was wide enough for both of them, and the light was good,